We're at T-minus 3 hours, 30 minutes, and counting. We have resumed our count. That is our final built-in hold in the countdown, and we're proceeding now toward our planned 12:54 p.m. liftoff. The Apollo 16 astronaut crew, Commander John Young, Command Module Pilot Ken Mattingly, and Lunar Module Pilot Charles Duke have been alerted to proceed with their suiting activities. Tony England, the astronaut member of the closeout crew, is in the spacecraft at this time. The activity going on at this time is injecting chlorine into the drinking water system. Our count continuing at this time, 3 hours, 29 minutes, 14 seconds, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
Okay, I guess I'm supposed to make a statement here about what we've been doing so far today. We got the crew up at 7:39, which is on schedule. Started breakfast 8:24, which is on schedule, of course, and started shooting 8:54. Just put the helmets and gloves on and be relaxing for about the next 10 minutes, and should be departing the suit room in about that time. Be down here in approximately 12 minutes and ready to go. It's a beautiful day out here, and everybody's happy this morning and ready to fly. I guess the normal question of what we had for breakfast, I always say steak and eggs, except this morning was a little bit different because it's a TV type steak and egg dinner, and it ain't very good. The crew had to suffer through that one, but then that's one of the penalties for flying a mission. The rest of us had bacon and eggs. If there are any questions, I'll answer them. Otherwise, we'll get back to work and see in about 10 minutes. How's my what? Oh, not very well at this point. It's going to get better in about 6 months. Thank you.
That was the Director of Flight Crew Training, Deke Slayton. For breakfast this morning, the crew was joined by Deke Slayton, by the backup pilots, backup command pilot Stu Russa, backup lunar module pilot Ed Mitchell, by NASA security man Charles Buckley, and by Dave Ballard, the Apollo 16 flight crew support team leader. Now T-minus 3 hours, 20 minutes, 59 seconds, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 3 hours, 11 minutes, 52 seconds, and counting. We're standing by at this time for the astronaut crew to depart from the suit room and come out of the Manned Spacecraft Operations building, where they'll get into their transfer van and make the 7-mile trip out to the pad. That trip's expected to take them about 15 minutes. Meanwhile, out of the launch pad, the closeout crew has the spacecraft ready for the astronauts, and the cryogenic loading of the space vehicle has been completed. Now, T-minus 3 hours, 11 minutes, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. Saturn Launch Control, we're now at T-minus 3 hours, 8 minutes, 59 seconds, and counting. The prime crew for Apollo 16 is now leaving the manned spacecraft operations building. They'll be accompanied in their van by Charles Buckley, NASA security, and Deke Slayton, the Director of Flight Crew Training. They're now entering the van. They're carrying their portable oxygen ventilators. This supplies the crew oxygen as they're sealed into their suits. They'll use this oxygen ventilator continually until they get into the spacecraft, at which time they'll go on to the spacecraft oxygen system. They're now in the van and departing for the pad. This pad's some 7 miles away, and it's expected that it will take them approximately 15 minutes to reach the pad area. Now at T-minus 3 hours, 8 minutes, 11 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
Demek ki o tamamen dışarıdan yalıtılmış bir sistem ki oksijeni oraya
Apollo Saturn Launch Control, we're T-minus 3 hours, 57 seconds and counting. The flight crew now on their way out to the launch pad in the transfer van. The problem mentioned earlier with the spare rate gyro is continuing to be observed. There's an attempt being made to isolate the problem to see if it could be in ground support equipment. If it is in ground support equipment, of course, that eliminates the problem. Also being evaluated at this time is just what the effect would be if such a problem occurred in flight. Preliminary indications are that it would not be serious, but these evaluations are continuing. The weather in the Kennedy Space Center area for launch time is predicted to be out about as it's seen now, with generally clear skies, temperature in the mid-80s, and winds from the south at approximately 15 miles per hour. A weather front, which had bothered the weathermen somewhat a few days ago, has not proceeded as fast as it was thought it might, and is now, or at launch time, is expected to be over Mobile, Alabama. The astronaut crew continuing on their way out to the pad at this time, and the closeout crew working diligently in the spacecraft and in the White Room area, waiting for the crew to come aboard. Now, T-minus 2 hours, 59 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 2 hours, 55 minutes, 57 seconds and counting. The astronaut van is now pulled to a stop in front of the Launch Control Center. At this point, the Director of Flight Crew Operations, Deke Slayton, will depart from the van and come into the Launch Control Center. The van will then proceed on out to the pad. Countdown continuing to run smoothly at this point. T-minus 2 hours, 55 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
Taşındığını söylüyor. O amaçla yapılmış bir otomobille taşınıyormuş.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're T-minus 2 hours, 45 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. The astronaut crew has now arrived at the pad area. They've gotten out of the transfer van and into the elevators. These are high-speed elevators which will take them up to the 320-foot level on the mobile launcher. There they'll cross swing arm high and enter the spacecraft. Actually, as it happens, the spacecraft commander, John Young, will move across the swing arm and be the first one to enter the spacecraft. The lunar module pilot, Charles Duke, will be the second to enter, and meantime, the command module pilot, Ken Mattingly, will remain in the elevator, waiting until the operation of ingressing the first two crewmen takes place.
Bu arada
John Young, the spacecraft commander, will sit on the left in the spacecraft. He'll be moved into the center
James Bond'la
couch, feet first, and then slide over to the left-hand couch. The lunar module pilot sits on the right. He moves into the center seat, then moves over to the right. About midway through the ingress procedure for the lunar module pilot, Ken Mattingly will be called from his position in the elevator where he's been waiting, and he'll move then into the center seat. After the crew is moved in, they'll disconnect their portable oxygen ventilators and go on the spacecraft oxygen system. The portable oxygen ventilators will then be removed. We're standing by now to see when the crew arrives at the 320-foot level. They're on their way up in the elevators now. We're expecting them there momentarily. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
220 feetlik bir irtifadaymış o kulenin asansörün varacağı yer. Oraya kadar asansörle taşınacaklar. Yani 70 metre falan mı oluyor acaba kulenin? 70-80 metre.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 2 hours, 43 minutes, 27 seconds and counting. The astronaut crew has now reached the 320-foot level, and the spacecraft commander, John Young, and the lunar module pilot, Charles Duke, have moved into the White Room area. Astronaut Tony England, who is assigned to the closeout crew, is in the spacecraft. He'll stay in there in the system as they move into the spacecraft. Right now, the spacecraft commander, John Young, is going over the sill, as they call it, moving feet first into the spacecraft. Once he is in there, they remove protective covers that he's had to protect his boots, and as he gets into the spacecraft, they'll connect the spacecraft oxygen system. After he gets down and moves over to that left-hand seat, he'll be positioned into the seat, and shoulder harnesses and lap harnesses, very similar to those worn by a pilot, will be adjusted. He also has a life vest that he's wearing. This too will be adjusted. Similar procedure is carried out for the next man to enter, the lunar module pilot Charles Duke. and as we mentioned earlier, about midway through the procedure of putting him into place and getting him comfortable and in position, they'll call on the command module pilot, Ken Mattingly, to come across the swing arm, and he will then be the last one to enter the spacecraft. The lunar module pilot, Charles Duke, now going across the sill. T-minus 2 hours, 41 minutes, 56 seconds, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 2 hours, 38 minutes, 55 seconds, and counting. The countdown continuing now at Kennedy Space Center as the astronaut crew moves aboard the spacecraft. Both the spacecraft commander, John Young, and the lunar module pilot, Charles Duke, are now aboard. As John Young got into his couch, made a communications check with the spacecraft test conductor back in the Manned Spacecraft Operations Building Control Center, Skip Chauvin, the test conductor, said, "Good morning, John. Welcome aboard the capsule." We're now standing by for the space command module pilot to come aboard the swing arm. He's standing by in the elevator, waiting for completion of the ingress of the other two crew members. The weather at Kennedy Space Center for launch time is predicted to be very good. We have sunny skies at this time, and it's predicted that these will stay much the same.
Hava çok açık
The
ve
weather is
güzelmiş.
expected, or the temperature is expected to be about 85 degrees at launch time, with winds from the south approximately
85
15
Fahrenheit
miles
derece
per hour.
ölçüsü.
A cold front, which had caused some concern a few days ago, has not moved as fast as was expected and is expected to be over Mobile, Alabama about launch time, causing no concern for our launch people here. Now standing by waiting for the closeout crew in the White Room area to call on the command module pilot, Ken Mattingly, who is standing by in the elevator. T-minus 2 hours, 37 minutes, 18 seconds, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 2 hours, 35 minutes, 1 second, and counting. We erroneously reported that the lunar module pilot had gone across the sill, and this was mistaken. This was a suit technician who followed John Young, the spacecraft commander, into the spacecraft. The lunar module pilot, now Charles Duke, has just moved into the center seat and is moving across now to the right-hand seat. We'll be standing by for them to call Ken Mattingly, the command module pilot, from his position in the elevator shortly. We have an unofficial log here, have the spacecraft commander going across the sill at T-minus 241 in our countdown, and the lunar module pilot going across at T-minus 235 in the countdown. Countdown continuing at this time, T-minus 2 hours, 34 minutes, 12 seconds, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're passing the T-minus 2 hour and 30 minute mark in the countdown at this time. T-minus 2 hours, 30 minutes, 52 seconds, and counting. They have just called the command module pilot, Ken Mattingly, and he is now coming across the swing arm into the White Room area. As the lunar module pilot, Charles Duke, moved into his seat and made a communications check, Skip Chauvin, the spacecraft test conductor, welcomed him with a good morning and welcome aboard. Lunar module pilot Charles Duke replied, "Good morning, how are you? And it's great to be here." Now standing in front of the spacecraft is Ken Mattingly waiting to go aboard. T-minus 2 hours, 30 minutes, 18 seconds, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
İsmi kesildi.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 2 hours, 15 minutes, 56 seconds, and counting. As the lunar module, or the command module pilot, Ken Mattingly, came aboard and hooked up his communications, he said, "Good morning. It is a pretty one, isn't it?" So the three crewmen all aboard now seem to be in very good spirits. To attempt to clarify a problem which came up earlier this morning with a launch vehicle during some flight control systems checks earlier, data indicated a momentary dropout of output from a spare rate gyro. Now, it should be emphasized that this is a spare rate gyro and that the primary system has passed all its tests successfully. Data is being evaluated at this time to see if the problem can be isolated to ground support equipment. If it's isolated to the gyro itself, further investigation is being carried on at this time to see just what effect this dropout of output would have. Early indications are, from evaluating data, that even if the primary system, which has checked out successfully, went bad and we went on this backup system, that the dropout seen would cause only minor problems. However, this is being further evaluated. Our countdown is continuing at this time. The three crewmen on board the spacecraft and the closeout crew making the final preparations in the spacecraft. Shortly they'll be closing the hatch and preparing to secure the white room area and make the cabin purge and leak checks. The countdown continuing at this time at T-minus 2 hours, 14 minutes, 23 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 2 hours, 56 seconds and counting. I logged the hatch going closed at the T-minus 2 hour and 7 minute mark. At this time now, the closeout crew will operate independently from the astronaut team inside the spacecraft. Inside the spacecraft, the astronaut team will be conducting abort advisory checks and an emergency detection system check. While outside the spacecraft, the closeout crew will continue with their work. This will include setting up the purge, which they are doing at this time, to run a purge and then do a cabin leak check. They purge the spacecraft system now with a mixture of oxygen and nitrogen. This is a 60-40 mixture, very similar to the air we breathe. They'll pressurize to slightly above the outside air pressure or ambient pressure, and then check for pressure decay. This is how they make the leak checks. After the leak check is taken place, the boost protective cover hatch will be closed, and the men will go about configuring or setting up the white room so that it will be prepared to handle the swing back when swing arm 9 moves back. The closeout crew is scheduled to be out of the pad area at the T-minus 55 minute mark in the countdown. Now T-minus 1 hour, 59 minutes, 34 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 1 hour, 50 minutes, 58 seconds and counting. At this time, the astronaut crew aboard the spacecraft are going through the emergency detection system tests. The emergency detection system can measure the pressures, thrusts, and other values aboard the space vehicle during powered flight. And if there was any type of an emergency condition, it could warn the astronauts in their space vehicle. During the test, simulated emergency conditions are sent to the spacecraft or to the space vehicle, and the astronauts in the spacecraft can monitor the fact that they are sent and verify the readouts. The test takes about 30 minutes and involves all three crew members. Spacecraft test conductor Skip Chauvin has indicated to the crew that they're running considerably ahead of schedule in the countdown. This is with the astronaut crew. The closeout crew, meanwhile, is finishing stowing up gear in the white room and completing their cabin purge and leak checks. T-minus 1 hour, 50 minutes and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 1 hour, 40 minutes, 57 seconds and counting. The astronaut crew has now completed the emergency detection system tests aboard the spacecraft and the cabin purge has been completed by the closeout crew. They're continuing to run the leak checks at this time. Cryogenic topping is continuing on the launch vehicle. This topping continues on down to the T-minus 3 minute 6 second mark in the countdown. Our weather forecast for launch time continues to look good. The skies in the Kennedy Space Center area are clear at this time and are predicted to remain much the same throughout the rest of the day. The temperatures at launch time are predicted to be about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds from the south at approximately 15 miles per hour. We continue to aim for our scheduled liftoff time of 12:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's now T-minus 1 hour, 40 minutes, 2 seconds, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 1 hour, 30 minutes, 58 seconds, and counting. Just seconds from now, a final Gym-sphere release will be made. The Gym-sphere is a weather balloon which measures the winds aloft. However, we don't anticipate any problems with any type of weather this morning. Spacecraft checkout is continuing ahead of schedule according to the test conductor, Skip Chauvin. The cabin purge has been completed and the spacecraft pressurized with a 60-40 mixture of oxygen and nitrogen. This mixture, similar to air, is pressurized slightly above the ambient pressure, and then the crew checks for any possible decay in that pressure. This ensures that we've had a proper seal with the hatch, which came closed earlier, and that we have no spacecraft leaks. These activities continuing at this time, T-minus 1 hour, 30 minutes, 9 seconds, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, or T-minus 1 hour, 20 minutes, 57 seconds, and counting. Just a short time ago, a first motion signal was sent to the vehicle. This signal is sent then and checked in Houston and by the range to ensure that they in turn are receiving it and will receive it at liftoff. Pressure checks have been completed inside the spacecraft, and the boost protective cover has now been placed over the hatch. The White Room crew is completing stowage and taking down the environmental protection plates around the spacecraft. They'll be leaving the spacecraft shortly, and at about T-minus 43 minutes in the countdown, the White Room will be retracted to the 12-degree mark. This is after the crew has completely cleared, the closeout crew has completely cleared the area. They're expected to be clear of the area by the T-minus 55-minute mark. Our countdown continuing smoothly at this time, T-minus 1 hour, 20 minutes, 1 second, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 1 hour, 10 minutes, 58 seconds, and counting. At the 1 hour and 13-minute mark, scheduled was a cue ball simulated command. This command goes to the cue ball and is read out in the spacecraft by the spacecraft commander. The cue ball is an angle of attack meter perched above the launch escape system, and it's used to give the spacecraft commander and the crew any signals which would indicate an out-of-tolerance condition during the early stages of flight. The countdown moving along well at this time, T-minus 1 hour, 10 minutes, 25 seconds, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 1 hour, 59 seconds, and counting, going into the final hour of the countdown. The spacecraft stabilization and control system has been powered up. Checks have been run on that by the spacecraft commander, John Young, and the command module pilot, John Mattingly. We've also just received word that King Hussein has landed at the airstrip on Cape Kennedy and will be over to the Kennedy Space Center shortly to view the launch.
Kral Hüseyin,
Our
Ürdün
countdown
Kralı
is
Kral
continuing
Hüseyin
here at
de
Kennedy
bu
Space Center. We'll
fırlatmayı
switch now
izlemek
to the
üzere az
Mission
evvel
Control Center in
uçağı
Houston for a
inmiştir.
status there.
This is Apollo Control Houston at minus 1 hour and counting. The worldwide manned spaceflight network is prepared for launch at this time. The network is clean without discrepancy. A calm but intense
Kral
atmosphere
Hüseyin
best
havacılığa
describes the
çok
mood of the
meraklı
Mission
birisiymiş.
Control
Kendisi de
Center at this
pilotmuş
time.
galiba.
Our cast of characters today, Flight Director Gene Kranz, the most veteran of the active flight directors, wearing his traditional white vest. This is his team, the white team of flight controllers. Our Capcom, Gordon Fullerton, served in the same capacity on Apollo 14 when the Alan Shepard crew was also launched on a Sunday. At all of the consoles here in Mission Control Houston, an experienced team of flight controllers ready to swing in action in less than an hour. This is Apollo Control Houston.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 54 minutes and counting. T-minus 54 minutes and counting. Earlier this morning, the cryogenics were loaded aboard the Saturn V space vehicle. The flight crew then came aboard and is now on board completing a series of communications checks. The weather continues to be clear as it's supposed to be for our launch time, and we continue to aim for launch at 12:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The command communication system, which carries the launch vehicle commands on S-band frequency, has now been turned on for launch. The liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen, the cryogenic fuels loaded earlier are continuing to be topped off. Countdown continuing at this time. We just received word that the Vice President of the United States, Spiro Agnew, has arrived at Cape Kennedy and is coming across to Kennedy Space Center to view the launch. Now T-minus 53
Başkan
minutes
yardımcısı
and counting.
Spiro
This is
Agnew
Kennedy Launch
gelmiş,
Control.
izleyecekmiş fırlatılışı.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, passing the 51-minute mark, T-minus 50 minutes, 57 seconds, and counting. We've just received a report that the launch site recovery forces and the helicopters are on station, ready to support the launch of Apollo 16. C-band beacon checks are underway at this time. These are beacons aboard the instrument unit of the space vehicle and used for tracking by the Eastern Test Range during the powered phase of flight. Both of the high-speed elevators at Launch Complex
Bu
39A, these
tırtılı
high-speed elevators in the mobile
nakliye
launcher,
cihazı
are
ilginç.
parked now at the 320-foot level
Bu
as
acaba
the crew.
yakıtı aktarmak amacıyla ona yanaşıp da yakıt mı acaba yükleyecek son anda? Şimdi çok ilginç bir şey bu. Böyle bir prosedür olduğunu ben bilmiyordum. Yoksa başka bir şey mi var?
The closeout crew has moved clear of the area. The swing arm 9, has just moved back to the retract position. This is a 12-degree standby position. From this position, it can be quickly returned to the spacecraft if needed, and will remain at this park position until the final moments of launch. At T-minus 5 minutes approximately, it will swing back to the full retract position. The countdown continuing at this time, T-minus 49 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 43 minutes and counting. A critical power transfer test was just conducted. During this test, the flight vehicle batteries take on the workload, having been shared up to that point by an external source. We've gone back to that external source again and we'll stay on that, saving the flight batteries until the final minute, approximately 50 seconds in the countdown. Superintendent of Range Operations just reported that the Kennedy Space Center is clear for launch. Now T-minus 42 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 39 minutes, 58 seconds and counting. Underway at this time are some checks of the Range Safety Command System. During these checks, a signal is sent to receivers aboard the 3 stages of the Saturn V launch vehicle. This receiver is connected to destruct packages aboard the vehicle. If the vehicle should stray off path due to a malfunction, the range safety officer could elect to send signals by way of these receivers to the destruct package. This would be done only after the astronaut crew, of course, had executed their abort and were well away from the vehicle. During these tests, the signals are sent with the destruct packages in an unarmed condition. It's a check to ensure that the signals are reaching the destruct packages, or at least for the test reaching the receiver. The swing arm now in the 12-degree position or park position. The astronaut crew aboard the spacecraft now in an emergency situation could use their launch escape tower to clear themselves well away from the spacecraft from the space vehicle in an emergency. In such an emergency, they would be carried to the proper altitude at which the regular spacecraft parachutes would deploy, and the crew would then make a normal recovery. They also have the option with the swing arm at the 12-degree position to call it back, where they could quickly then go across the swing arm, again having an option of either taking an elevator to a safe area at the bottom of the pad, or a slide wire which has a cab attached to it which would carry them to the pad perimeter. These would be decisions depending on the type of emergency. In the Launch Control Center, the Vice President of the United States, Spiro Agnew, just walked into the viewing room. He will plan to view the launch from here. Now, T-minus 38 minutes, 6 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 34 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. At this time, the support controller, Joe Barfus, has indicated that the industrial water system is ready to support the launch. At the T-minus 1 minute mark, the flame deflector underneath the 5 Saturn V first stage engines will start being covered with water coming out at 13,000 gallons per minute. At the T0 mark, the swing arms will be quenched with water 7,500 gallons per minute. As the vehicle lifts off at the +2 second mark, 50,000 gallons per minute of water will flush the mobile launcher decks, and another 30,000 gallons will be quenching the flame deflectors. In the spacecraft, the astronaut team is making a series of switch checks. Spacecraft commander has made checks following the retraction of swing arm 12 to arm the various pyrotechnics. This includes the launch escape system aboard the vehicle. The range safety command checks have now been completed. T-minus 33 minutes, 54 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 27 minutes, 58 seconds and counting. Just a few moments ago, various elements of the launch team began reporting in to the test supervisor, Gordon Turner, reporting that we were go for continuing the countdown. At this time, we're continuing to look at the problem with a backup yaw gyro. This is still being evaluated, but we expect a resolution on that momentarily. Various other elements of the countdown, all continuing well at this time. T-minus 27 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 24 minutes, 58 seconds and counting. The problem which we spoke of earlier, the problem with a backup yaw gyro, has been resolved, and we have been given a go for launch. All possible modes of failure were evaluated should this be a problem with flight hardware, and it was determined after evaluating each of these that they would have no impact on the mission. Liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen continue to be topped off in the space vehicle, and our weather continues to be good, predicted to be good for launch time, aiming toward a 12:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time launch. Now, T-minus 24 minutes, 15 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 19 minutes and counting. T-minus 19 minutes and counting. We just received word from recovery forces that all recovery forces are on station and ready to support the launch of Apollo 16. Also, the Manned Spaceflight Network has indicated they are ready to support. An earlier problem with a power dropout in a switching station in Monrovia, West Virginia, has been taken care of by going to a backup station. T-minus 18 minutes, 34 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're at T-minus 14 minutes, 59 seconds and counting. Scheduled at this time are some Mission Control Center updates to the computer clock aboard the command module. This is actually synchronizing the spacecraft timing system with that in the Mission Control Center. Also, the command module pilot, Ken Mattingly, has been giving readouts on the service module quadrants. These are giving temperatures, pressures, and fuel quantities. A short time ago, the S2 start tank chill down began. This is chilling that system to prepare it to accept the extremely cold liquid hydrogen. Computer checks are underway also at this time. A check going on is the check of the vehicle digital computer to be sure that it's in the prepare to launch mode. Several of these computer checks are run during the count to ensure proper communications between the computers in the launch control center and the mobile launcher, and also to ensure they're in the correct mode. Countdown continuing now, passing the T-minus 14-minute mark. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 10 minutes and counting, and we just heard from the spacecraft commander, John Young, that Casper and Orion are go for launch. The spacecraft is now on full internal power. Up to this point, it's been sharing its power load with the ground supply. A short time ago, the Astrocom circuit was checked out. This is the circuit that the astronauts will be on during the launch phase. They'll be on this with Stoney, the astronaut communicator here in the Launch Control Center, the Launch Operations Manager, Paul Donnelly, and the spacecraft test supervisor, Skip Chauvin. The crew actually goes onto the Astrocom circuit at the T-minus 4-minute mark in the countdown. Our weather continues to look good for launch as we aim toward a 12:54 p.m. Eastern Standard Time liftoff. Now at T-minus 9 minutes, 11 seconds, and counting, this is Kennedy Launch Control.
Yani bu düzeneğin istim tutup istim salması bile yarım saatten fazla sürüyor. Şöyle bir baktım da fırlatmadan evvel yarım saat, belki biraz daha fazla bir süreden önce istim tutup istim salmaya başlıyor.
is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We're now passing the 6-minute mark in the countdown. Emergency detection system has now been placed in the launch mode. Houston Flight has also indicated that they are go for the automatic sequencer. At the T-minus 3 minute 7 second mark, the launch will go on the automatic sequencer, and from that point on, the launch will be automatically handled by the sequencer. Coming up on the T-minus 5 minute and 30 second mark, at that time we'll be standing by for a go to launch from Mission Director Chet Lee. Mission Director verifies go for launch. Mission Director Chet Lee from Houston verifies go for launch. All elements now reporting into Test Supervisor Gordon Turner that they are go for launch. Now T-minus 5 minutes, 13 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. Control, we're approaching the 4-minute mark. T-minus 4 minutes, 32 seconds and counting, and swing arm number 9 is now swinging back to the full retract position. The astronaut crew aboard are making their final switch checks, reading off the final positions, preparation for launch. As we approach the final minutes here, we'll go into a relatively silent period as far as reporting goes. The launch team indicates that they will have only negative reporting. If there's a problem only, will they come up on the air at this time. Now T-minus 4 minutes, 3 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. This is Kennedy Launch Control. Launch Operations Manager Paul Donnelly just called the 3 astronauts and said that the Apollo 16 launch team wishes them good luck and Godspeed. They all replied thank you, and we're now have a quiet circuit as they switch over to the Astrocom circuit. We're now T-minus 3 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. We're approaching the time when the countdown goes on the terminal sequencer. The sequencer commands a variety of functions, all of which must occur in the proper sequence for the count to continue. Also here in the control center, the people will continue to monitor what are called the red line values to ensure that everything is go for launch. The instrument unit light, panel light now on the status board indicates instrument unit ready, spacecraft ready, emergency detection system ready. We've passed the 2 minute 50 second mark, and we're now on the terminal sequencer. Terminal sequencer has started. This terminal sequencer will pressurize the fuel tanks. These fuel tanks are pressurized to ensure that as the fuels deplete, they are forced down to assure an even flow into the engine. Fuel tanks are now being pressurized. The S4B, or third stage liquid oxygen tank, has just been pressurized, and the second stage liquid oxygen tank has been pressurized. As we move down through the count at the T-minus 17 second mark, we'll get a release of the guidance system in the instrument unit. Also handled by the automatic sequencer will be the release of swing arms number 1 and number 2. The ignition of the Saturn V 5 engines, the first stage 5 engines, will take place at 8.9 seconds in the countdown, 8.9 seconds. The engines will, or the vehicle will then be held down until we build up to 7.7 million pounds of thrust. At the T-minus 3 minute mark, tape recorders on board the spacecraft were turned on. These recorders record both voice and data. Spacecraft now to full internal cooling. Cooling load has been shared with a ground cooling. T-minus 90 seconds and counting. T-minus 90 seconds and counting. At T-minus 1 minute 15 seconds, the spacecraft batteries will be turned on for launch. These batteries will give an additional power source to the spacecraft, as well as be acting as a backup for the fuel cells. The third stage liquid hydrogen tanks now pressurized. All third stage tanks pressurized. Second stage tanks also
Sıvı
pressurized.
hidrojen
T-minus 1
hazneleri
minute. T-minus 1 minute and counting.
basıncı,
Now
sıvı
moving into the final
hidrojen
minute of the count.
haznelerin basıncı
We'll be standing
faal
by
hale
to
geçirilmiştir.
for the switch over to internal
Çifte
power.
yakıt
Switch over taking place at this time, going on internal power. T-minus
oksijen
45 seconds
sıvı
and
oksijen
counting.
haznesi var. Bir de
Guidance aligned just
sıvı
announced by
hidrojen
John Young. That will be the
haznesi
last
var.
action taken by the crew aboard the spacecraft. T-minus 35 and counting.
Çifte özellikli yakıt var.
Countdown continuing to go well. T-minus 30. T-minus 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17. Guidance release. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. The engine's now building up to 7.7 million pounds of thrust. We have a launch commit and we have a liftoff. The swing arms moving back. The Saturn V lifting off the pad, building up thrust. We've cleared the tower.
Houston is now controlling.
Oh, you have good thrust in all five. Roger.
Pitch and roll program started.
Roger.
16 now maneuvering to its proper flight path attitude. Mark 27 seconds. Seconds. Roll program completed. Pitch profile still in progress. 40 seconds. Mark 50 seconds. Cabin pressure relieving. Adjusting now from sea level to a space environment. Well, altitude.
Stand by. Hold one problem. One problem. You're wet now. 16. Roger.
That call up from Capcom Gordon Fullerton says Apollo 16 now capable of water landing. Mark 1 minute 12 seconds coming up on period of maximum aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. One minute 22 seconds. 6 nautical miles in altitude, looking good. Mark 1 minute 30 seconds. 8 nautical miles in altitude. Mark 1 minute 41 seconds. Pass through max Q, still looking good.
Through max Q and everything looks good.
16 now, 12.5 nautical miles in altitude. Young Duke maddeningly moving out to the outer traces of the Earth's atmosphere.
Stand by for move 1 Charlie. Roger, we're Mark 1 Charlie.
Bu spikerin verdiği teknik malumattır. Anladığım kadarıyla lift-off tabir edilen cismin zeminle temasının kesildiği andan itibaren geçen süreyi saniye cinsinden, yani dakika ve saniye cinsinden veriyor. Verdiği ikinci veri de o an itibariyle eriştiği irtifanın ölçüsünü feet cinsinden veriyor. Bir de down range diye bir şey söylüyor. O down range muhtemelen şu olsa gerek. Şimdi irtifayı ya da altitude'u anlayabiliyoruz. Şimdi o an itibariyle bulunduğu konumdan itibaren tasavvur edilen bir dikey hattın ölçüsü olsa gerek irtifa. Ama o irtifa kesbederken bir yana doğru meylediyor gördüğünüz gibi. Dolayısıyla down range'inden mesafe ölçüsü muhtemelen o an itibariyle bulunduğu konumun fırlatma lampası gibi bir noktaya göre düşünülen o iki noktayı birleştiren bir hattın mesafesi olsa gerek. Anladığım kadarıyla devam ederiz.